So during this quarantine, like everybody else, I have a lot of free time, and I decided to revisit some of my favorite movies, particularly the horror ones. However, when looking up a lot of them, I checked out some of the reviews that came out about them during the time. Surprisingly to me, some of them that I really like got really panned by critics. Some of them I can kind of understand why they didn't really like them, but others I really didn't understand. So I decided to do something a little different. I decided to do a list. This is my list of horror films that I like, but critics really don't like them. Now, keep in mind, I'm keeping this list relatively short. If I were to do every single movie that I like and critics despise, we're going to be here for a few days as opposed to a few minutes. Also, these are going to be horror related movies, and only these few ones that I've chosen for this list. If people like what I did with this video here, then maybe I'll do a part 2 explaining the other half that I really like. But for the time being, this is the top 7 horror movies that I like but critics hate. Number 7. As above, so below. Okay, so I'm putting this one pretty low on the list for a few reasons. Remember when I told you earlier on in the video that there were a few horror films that critics hated that I can kind of understand why they were hated? This is one of them. And I can kind of get it for, again, just for a few reasons. This movie came out during that time where there was this string of found footage horror films, and it was like we were getting them minute after minute after minute, and it was coming around the time of the popularity of the Paranormal Activity film franchise. We were just getting tons of them, and it seemed like for a long time it wasn't going to stop, and this got added to the jumble. Personally, in my opinion, its biggest disservice is the fact that it is found footage. I don't know why it was, because I think this movie would have done very well if it was just a movie. If it was shot like a movie, like a regular movie. The story, in my opinion, is actually kind of interesting. Plus, it's not exactly scary ish. Personally, a lot of the movies on this list aren't scary, but there were some genuinely creepy moments. Like the moment when shit really hits the fan and the girl is kind of just running through these endless catacombs trying to find their way out. The cast, in my opinion, is solid. The story is very fascinating. In fact, anything having to deal with the catacombs in Paris, which is the setting of this place, is very fascinating. The catacombs there have always been a place I've wanted to visit. It is a super creepy place that you can actually go there and visit and actually walk through. Perfect setting for a horror film. In fact, a few other horror films have tackled this idea, but in my opinion, it's a good horror film. Again, biggest disservice is that it's found footage, in my personal opinion, and it does succumb to a lot of the cliches we get. Tons and tons of jump scares, tons of fake outs, and predictable things that are coming that you can see a mile away. But then again, it's still a fun movie in my opinion. Again, my favorite. Critics didn't like it. Kind of get it, but I still like it. Number 6. The Reaping. Another cool concept, but I feel was kind of wasted here. Hilary Swank and Idris Elba both deliver great performances in this, and overall I thought the camera work was pretty solid. The mystery in the beginning was pretty good, but it kind of falls flat a little bit as the film progresses. There's a subplot dealing with Hilary Swank's character where she's a mother and she lost her child through religious means, and that's the reason why she never takes anything dealing with religion or spiritual seriously. She always tries to prove that anything dealing with that can be explained scientifically. And in my personal opinion, it kind of comes full circle and it kind of doesn't. You're kind of left wondering, wait, so, but I thought but wait. Yeah, yeah, kind of like that. That's kind of how I felt. And again, the concepts sound pretty interesting. The 10 plagues of Egypt in a horror setting. That sounds pretty cool. But again, as it kind of got towards the ending, we kind of lost the atmosphere and it kind of went nuts. You know how most people like The Last Exorcism, but they all keep saying the ending of it sucked, and I am one of them? That's kind of how I felt with The Reaping. It's the same thing where the mystery of everything that's going on is really cool, especially the little girl actress who was really, really creepy and did a really, really good job. But shoot, not even at the ending, towards the middle, like the beginning of the third act of the movie is really when the reaping started to just kind of take a nosedive a little bit. No, straight nosedive, not even a little bit, just a straight nosedive, and it went crazy. And then the twist ending as to what's going on kind of left me head scratching like, this is another one where I can understand critics didn't like this one, but it's a guilty pleasure. I really like it. I still kind of really, really like it, despite its faults. So I guess a little bit more than I love As Above So Below more than this one. So I guess I can call The Reaping a little bit of a guilty pleasure, but still I like it. Number 5. Ghost Ship. I remember watching this early in the early 2000s. I remember my mom brought in the DVD and I saw the ship with the skull in front of it and it kind of intrigued me. So I wanted to know about it. I wanted to figure out what this film was about. And when I was a kid, it did genuinely creep me out when I saw this movie. It was the mystery of everything that was going on, not so much the gore. Gore really doesn't creep me out or gross me out at all. It follows that classic trope: a bunch of people go into a place where they're not supposed to be and they come across these things that they're unfortunate to run into and they pay the price for it. But there is a little bit of a twist to how they got into this predicament and how it's all kind of connected that I thought was kind of cool, that I really didn't see much, at least back then. Now I can kind of see these cliches more for what they are now. Again, this is another one where I can sort of see why critics didn't like this one. Again, it has the standard cliches, the jump scares and the fake outs, but the editing really didn't help it either. With the herky jerkiness of everything, you can kind of tell what's gonna happen, and the music really does kind of tell on those scenes ahead of time that, oh, it's coming, the scare is coming. But other than that, unlike The Reaping and As Above So Below, this one genuinely creeped me out a lot as a kid. So yeah, more than a guilty pleasure, definitely a very good movie. Yeah, this was genuinely creepy to me as a kid, and it still gets me a little bit as an adult. So yeah, I would say, yeah, it's pretty good. Number 4. Taking Lives. Now we're entering the movies that I flat out don't get why critics are so mean to these movies, because let me tell you, this is one of those movies next to Silence of the Lambs that made me want to get into filmmaking. I thought this was a fantastic movie. Now, I guess there is a little bit of a debate as to whether this is a horror film. I personally think because there are some genuine moments that did scare me when I was a kid, even some that creeped me out even as an adult. I would call it more psychological horror thriller, but I'm still including it in the list because there are horror elements in it. Ethan Hawke And Angelina Jolie did a fantastic job in this movie, and the entire movie is just dripping in gritty, surreal atmosphere just throughout the whole thing. And the concept is very, very interesting. A serial killer who assumes their victim's identity, and when the identity has outlived its usefulness, it moves on to the next person and assumes their identity and keeps going, and they're trying to track this person. The twist of this movie kind of caught me off guard a little bit, as, again, last few movies I've talked about on this list have had twists. This one generally kind of got me a little bit because the way they set it up, I really didn't see it coming. It is a great psychological horror film in my opinion, and I do not get why critics hated this movie so much. I would definitely recommend this one for like a Friday night if you want to watch something really good, something really engaging, something really smart. Go and check this out. I highly recommend it. Number 3. Stay Alive. This is me and my family's one of our favorites ever. This is a movie we watch every time it comes on the TV. We will watch it all the way through. No matter what point it's at, we will keep going. I thoroughly enjoyed this one, and honestly, I don't get why critics hated this one. I really don't, because it genuinely did scare me and my family when we saw it for the first time. And every time we keep going back to it, we find little things that the filmmakers made for it that you couldn't see at a first glance. You know how some horror films would just put something there that at first your eye couldn't track it, but you know for a fact like maybe there's something else there. On a few other viewings, when me and my family would go back to that movie, we would find little things and we would just like be like, whoa. That's how much we enjoyed it. Made by the same guy who did The Boy, a movie that, I'll be 100% honest with you, I am not a fan of, but I like this one. I'm putting it on the list, so good job, man. Another movie that follows the concept of a group of people who are put into a situation they don't understand but deals with video games. And me as a kid was a geek when it came to video games, particularly horror ones. I grew up with Resident Evil, Silent Hill, another one I don't know if you've ever seen called Siren. That was a really good one, a Japanese horror game that still freaks me out every time I play it. And it deals with the concept of if this supernatural dark force within this video game where if your character dies in the game, you die for real. Sort of like a Nightmare on Elm Street kind of concept where if you die in the dream, you die for real. The way they handled it, I personally liked it. Also, this movie, surprisingly, around the time I was watching this movie, there's a subplot dealing with the classic serial killer, a real serial killer named Countess Elizabeth Bathory, whom, surprising to my parents, I actually was very well aware of because she had ties to Dracula, who I am a very geek of. I want you to remember Dracula's name because he's going to pop up in this list very, very soon. Just keep that in mind. Other than that, this movie is very, very good. I enjoy it. It's one I can watch a dozen times and never get tired of, and I'm going to watch it a few dozen more times. It's good. Go check it out. If you haven't already seen it, definitely. Number 2. Gothika. This is one of my all-time favorite psychological supernatural horror films, and even years later, I'm still baffled by the fact that critics really didn't like this movie because It's engaging in every way to me. For the longest time, I thought I was one of the only few who actually remembers this movie, but come to find out, a lot of my friends did grow up with this movie too. Some of them remember it as, oh yeah, there was that Halle Berry horror movie, while others, this legitimately scarred them as kids. And again, besides the ghost elements of this, there is a secondary plot to this thing when you really find out what's going on that just flips the script and makes this not only more scary but just disturbing. Halle Berry, Robert Downey Jr., before he became Iron Man, did a fantastic job in this. This was a fan freaking tastic horror film. I don't get why it was so hated and so panned by everybody. It just baffled me. Psychiatric hospitals and asylums have always been creepy locations for me, perfect places for horror films. Some movies did this the right way, others, like House on Haunted Hill, did not. No. Other one, the remake. There we go. Did this the wrong way, in my opinion, where it wasn't scary at all. If you haven't seen this movie, then I would highly recommend. And it honestly feels good that I am not alone in loving this horror film. If you've seen the movie, you know where I was going with that not alone thing. That was cheesy. Moving on. And the number one horror film that I like but critics hate is Dracula 2000. Yep. Told you Dracula was going to appear on this list. So, okay. A little story about me. When I was a kid growing up, the first thing that ever introduced me to vampires was a little movie called Blade. Even though my father claims that it was Vampire Hunter D. I do remember both of these movies, but the one I definitely remember the most was Blade. And when I got introduced to vampires, I thought they were the coolest thing ever. And then, moments after, I got introduced to the coolest movie monster and my personal number one favorite movie monster of all time, Count Dracula. And I've geeked off of him ever since. Even now, as an adult, I watch and read anything Dracula related. With my parents, I tortured them with the 3Ds: Disney, dinosaurs, and Dracula. Yes, I did. And one of the movies I remember being one of my all-time favorite was Dracula 2000. I remember the day when I went to the video stores when they were still all around. I bought the VHS, put it in, and I ran the tape out because I couldn't stop watching it. This entire movie kept me going. And I'll be very honest with you, this is another one of those movies that made me want to be a filmmaker. I'm not joking. But with that said, and I know this is going to sound really, really weird, seeing how it seems like right now I'm the biggest fan of this movie, I can get why critics don't like this movie. It really isn't that hard to tell because, to be very honest with you, yes, it is a horror film. It doesn't really scare me. Honestly, barely anything Dracula related scares me, except that new Dracula 2020 thing on Netflix. If you haven't seen that one, I highly recommend it. It's a very good show. Gerald Butler did a fantastic job as Dracula. The guy from Hackers also did a great job. Christopher Plummer, such a good Van Helsing. Oh my goodness. Not only that, but this has possibly one of the best Dracula backstories I've ever heard of when it came to this character. There's a twist. Everybody's trying to figure out why Dracula can't die the conventional ways that vampires can, through steaks or through garlic or through decapitations. So they go crazy trying to figure out, why is that? Who is Dracula? And there's a twist to who he really is that was fantastic. I actually found out that this was one of the reasons why people didn't like this movie, especially critics, but in my personal opinion, it's one of the best flips of the Dracula mythology I've ever heard. We're all familiar with Dracula's story, so it's really good that they tried to do something different. Patrick Lussier, and I hope I'm pronouncing this man's name correctly, did a fantastic job with this. And I actually do recommend this. I actually do find that a lot of my friends did see this movie when they were teenagers. A lot of them made fun of it at their Halloween parties. A lot of them just was like, "Oh yeah, I vaguely remember that. It's that movie that came out during the 2000s era." But it's one of the movies that, in my personal opinion, gave me my love for movies, and especially with vampires and with horror. Now, there were two other movies to this movie called Dracula 2 Ascension and Dracula 3 Legacy. They're not that good. They're not really that great. But I personally kind of put those two movies in the category of The Last Airbender. Okay, wait a minute. Actually, these two movies are better than The Last Airbender. I will admit that right now. But these two movies, if you have nothing else to watch late at night, go for it. Check it out. And with that said, that was my top 7 horror movies that I like but critics hate. If you liked what you saw, click that like button, and if you want to see a part 2 to know the other movies that I liked but critics hate, please put it down in the comments section and let me know. Hope you guys stay healthy and stay well during these rough times. See you guys.